Welcome to the Morgan Kimbarow Show. Our guest today is Amy Reichert. She is a political activist, a political candidate. She is a member of the executive committee. She is the chairwoman of Restore San Diego and the incoming vice chair of the San Diego Republican Party. Amy, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me here.
Absolutely. Well, Amy, I think people should start to get to know you and your genesis, your story of, who you are, right? How you got involved in politics, some of your background. I think people should hear about you.
I was never really political. I do have a poli-sci degree from San Diego State University, but I never really used it. And then when 2020 hit, all of a sudden everything was political, whether it was reopening schools or reopening businesses. And that's when I took a stand, and I'm one of the co-founders of Reopen San Diego.
Nice. So during COVID, right? I mean, that was your genesis, right, of getting involved in politics, right? And let's talk about, just the beginning of COVID, right? Like how you reacted to it initially, right? And what prompted, right, for you to get involved and start Restore San Diego.
Like a lot of people, I took COVID seriously at first and the lockdowns. I had my son, who was 9 years old at the time, and so he wound up on Zoom school. But then I had a distinct moment where I woke up and it changed everything. And that is when beaches were closed in California. So I'll never forget the day that they were reopened. And I went out there, and my son, he was just so happy to be boogie boarding after being trapped on a computer for so long. And that's when a lifeguard told me that I had to keep moving, that I couldn't even sit on the sand. There was nobody around us. Then just 2 weeks later, 2 miles from my home, that's when we had the La Mesa riots. And when I saw public health officials go from, you're a granny killer if you go to the beach, to, oh, no, it's okay to protest and riot and burn down buildings. You won't spread COVID that way. That's when I had my wake-up moment.
Wow. Yeah, I remember those times where we were all locked in, right? Sheltering in place, right? Stay home, save lives. All that was, coming down, propaganda. And then all of a sudden, right, the riots start after George Floyd. And there was just a total lack of coherent or logic or just common sense, right? Of, okay, why all of a sudden are we allowed to go protest into the streets? And obviously those got violent. So you did a lot of great work, right, with businesses, right, that closed. And I think so many people, everybody thought the lockdowns was a good idea, but we forgot to understand, okay, there's capitalism, right? We live in America with a capitalist society, right? What was happening with the small businesses?
People were hurting.
Yeah.
At this time, that's when the San Diego County Board of Supervisors meetings were not even open to the public. You could only speak to a county board of supervisor on Zoom. And I remember listening to those meetings and hearing people crying. Some people just crying and speaking in Spanish about how their lives and their livelihoods were turned upside down. And so we organized our very first rally for Reopen San Diego not until November of 2020, when Gavin Newsom put us all in that color-coded tier. Remember the purple tier?
Yes.
Yes. So that's when we had our very first rally. That was when we started speaking out.
Absolutely. And just backtracking really quick, right? Really want to hit on your background a little bit more, right? Of how you approached this, right? Because you were a Democrat before, and you had all this multitude of experience, right? You grew up in San Diego. Let's just talk a little bit more about your bio before we kind of get into some more of the topical stuff.
I'm a lifelong San Diegan. My dad worked at FedMart, and my mom was a secretary. And I pretty much was raised like a Democrat. Everybody in the family was a Democrat. I was a Democrat. And then probably about 10 years ago, that's when I started seeing how far left, specifically the California Democratic Party went. And I didn't feel so much as I left the Democratic Party as they left me. Mm-hmm. And so when it came to COVID, and I saw these massive lockdowns and the censorship that went with it, I saw some real red flags, especially what the California Democratic Party had become authoritarian and tyrannical.
Yeah. Yeah, it's quite interesting, right? I mean, where the Democrat Party is, right? You go back to past presidential candidates, right? JFK, right? Even Bill Clinton, and now it's, you see like the censorship that's being pushed. You've had a lot of success recently on X, right? Formerly Twitter. Elon Musk took it over and has revamped the platform. Talk a little bit about, your like X, right? And how that's kind of shifted, right? Censorship or away from censorship.
So when I first started speaking out about lockdowns and the inconsistencies that I saw, I would get warnings from Facebook. So what that really forced me to do was go out into the real world and do real world stuff, which I'm grateful for. It was wrong for Facebook, Meta, to censor people at the behest of the Biden administration. We know that the Biden administration told Mark Zuckerberg to censor anyone who is a COVID dissident. And I certainly wound up in Facebook jail more than I'd like to admit. So it forced me into the real world, which I'm grateful for. But back to X, what I've really seen with X is it's the wild, wild west, which I love. I love that I could say just about anything, and I am not going to get a warning from X. I recently just started on TikTok. I have an Instagram with almost 34,000 followers, just specifically focusing on San Diego politics. And my X is the same. I talk about San Diego politics. But I got a warning on TikTok for talking about the border fires and how I did a Public Records Act request, and it came back in May. 7 out of 8 of the border fires were started by people who entered illegally into the country, either intentionally or negligently. And I got a warning from TikTok. So I'm grateful for X, and it's been fun, actually. And I even get little checks from Elon Musk. So he shares revenue with content creators. So it's an added bonus, or at least I can justify to my husband why I tweet so much. I'm getting paid, honey.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite fascinating, right? And, Twitter to X, right, has the X now. And, in Elon Musk, right? I mean, the richest man in the world is interacting with just random people. I've had friends that get retweeted, right, with just a few thousand followers. And, the thing I think is fascinating about social media, right, is it's a disintermediation of just the normal platforms of communication, right, with, the networks, right, and then Hollywood, right? So you have people like yourself and myself with the podcast, right, that are able to permeate and get messages out, right? It's like, it's like the populism, right? Like versus like the elites, and so you've been an activist, right? Fighting for the little man, fighting for the working class, right? Let's talk about that, right? Of like what it takes to organize, what it takes to, push back against the institutions, not just, the platforms, but also government as well.
I'm really grateful for the experiences that I've had in my lifetime. I've had more than one career. One of my careers, and I still have my license, I'm a California licensed private investigator. And so being able to research what was going on specifically during the lockdowns, that was really important component. The other experience that I've had in my lifetime, I worked at a megachurch, and I was in ministry for 10 years. And so I've built ministry teams. And then in the past 7 years, I've worked in marketing. I've been the director of partnerships for an e-commerce brand. So having all of those talent stacks and experiences together, it really lent itself to building Reopen San Diego into a household name. And I would say anyone that's listening, and if you have something that you feel really passionately about, I'm going to give you some advice. You're probably going to go, huh? It isn't going to be build your social media brand, because Mark Zuckerberg or the government can take that away at any time. I would encourage people to continue on that path, but don't rely on it. What we did with Reopen San Diego is we intentionally built an email list. And so we would communicate calls to action and information. And eventually we used it as a fundraising platform because we found ourselves filing a federal case against the city of San Diego when they passed an ordinance saying that if you didn't get the COVID shot, you couldn't work for the city, you couldn't volunteer, you couldn't serve on a board or commission, and you couldn't hold elected office. And we knew that that was wildly unconstitutional, and I'm happy to say we actually prevailed in that, and we beat the city of San Diego with the vaccine mandate. And it was all possible because we took that step of building community.
Absolutely. And part of that, right, was going to the County Board of Supervisors meetings, right? Right, getting an audience of people, right, to communicate their dissent with that policy, right? And you know, you that's kind of, I think, where you came up, right, and kind of got put on a lot of people's radars, right?
It was amazing. It was August of 2021, and we did a call to action, show up to the Board of Supervisors meeting. There was a line that went all the way from the front doors of the county administration all the way to Ash Street, if anybody who's listening knows San Diego. And I'll never forget that the sheriffs who were doing the intake when we were coming in, he said, "We've never seen anything like this kind of response in the history that they have worked there." And that individual had worked at the county administration for 7 years. So we went in and we had the County Board of Supervisors up until midnight listening to the public address them. Because remember, this is now late 2021 and they're still just hassling us with vaccine passports and vaccine mandates. And I'm happy to say that as a result of that, we made national and international news, but there were some downsides too. We also got branded. We got branded extremists for merely speaking out against what the lockdowns were all about.
Yeah. And your coalition wasn't just conservatives or Republicans, right? It was also Democrats as well, right? I mean, there were people from all walks of life and different backgrounds, religions, political persuasions, right? I mean, it was a diverse coalition.
Absolutely. In fact, I would say the most common person that joined our coalition was a no party preference.
Mm-hmm.
These are people that have been disenfranchised or feel disenchanted, not only by the Democratic Party, but by the Republican Party too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to hit on a little bit, right, with the political party system, right? You know, I like to say, hey, I'm first and foremost a Christian, then I'm someone who loves my country, I'm a patriot, then I'm a conservative, and by way, that's how I come to the Republican Party, right? That being said, you know, I think that we can level with just everybody that politics is broken on both sides, Republicans and Democrats. I mean, just from a whole, like, big, you know, we talked about this, right? Big money in politics, right? What have you. You know, if you're looking at the political landscape today, you know, what would be your criticism of it?
Special interests and dark money.
Mm-hmm.
So in 2022, the district lines were redrawn, and I found myself in Nathan Fletcher's district. And anybody who's listening, if you don't know who Nathan Fletcher is, he was once the most powerful man politically in San Diego County, married to the most powerful woman, a union boss, Lorena Gonzalez. He has since spectacularly publicly imploded because of sexual harassment and sexual assault allegations, yes, which are being litigated in court as we speak. But I challenged him, and it was definitely a David versus Goliath battle. I'm a believer. As I shared, I worked at a church, and I follow Christ. I felt called to enter that race, knowing what a challenge it was. So people kind of assume, oh, well, in any given population, 50% are Democrats and 50% are Republicans. No. Mm-hmm. When I ran against Nathan Fletcher and challenged him, it's called a D+30 district. That means there are 2.5 times more Democrats than Republicans. Specifically, the breakdown was it was 50% Republican and 19% Republican and 50% Democrat. Wow. So even in that race, it was interesting to see in what should have been perceived by him as a slam dunk race. Hundreds of thousands of dollars were spent against me. Lorena Gonzalez took money from her old campaign. She used to be an assemblywoman. She transferred over $200,000 from a previous campaign to the Democratic Party, and then the Democratic Party funneled it to her husband. That's just one example of dark money. Apparently, that's legal. Shouldn't be. Because as an individual, if you want to support a candidate for supervisor, the max that you can contribute is $1,000. That's not the case for PACs. A PAC can come in, and in my case, when I ran in the special election for supervisor, $1.1 million was spent against me by the labor unions, and of all things, Jane Fonda's PAC.
Jane Fonda.
Yes.
Hanoi Jane.
Why did she get involved? She doesn't even live here.
Fascinating. I want to talk a little bit more about Nathan Fletcher, right? Because he really was the architect of the lockdowns here in San Diego. He was the chairman of the County Board of Supervisors, right? So he was the head person. You ran against him. And, something I find so interesting, and again, you're more well-versed in this than I am, but he right now is paying his legal bills with his campaign funds from his state Senate race that he was only in for 2 weeks. And he was also formerly a Republican in the state assembly. And then all of a sudden, I was always, whatever he said, right? The Republican Party left me, Talk a little bit more about him, because I just see him kind of as like just your typical, just scummy, sociopathic type of guy, cheats on his wife, flip-flops this there, right? I mean, just let's talk a little bit more about Nathan Fletcher.
I think it's important to talk about him because he was such an important figure in San Diego politics for so very long. He started off as an assemblyman, and as a Republican, he was the former Marine and beautiful wife who worked for George W. Bush. And I believe she was one of the directors for him. So when Nathan Fletcher proposed to her, he actually asked George Bush for her hand in marriage, which was very interesting. So he was the Republican darling, and he decided to run for San Diego mayor. Well, another really prominent San Diego political figure is Carl DeMaio. Carl DeMaio was also running for San Diego mayor. And as it turns out, Carl DeMaio got the Republican endorsement. So that night at Central Committee, when he got the endorsement, Nathan Fletcher stood up, and I've heard this story from multiple people. He basically huffed and puffed and stormed his way out there, out the door. The very next day, he became an independent. He took all of that Republican money with him, by the way, all of his donor money. Well, he figured out it wasn't so great being an independent. There's no party structure, even to this day, for anybody who wants to be an independent. So fast forward, huge scandal. He winds up divorcing his first wife, winds up marrying Lorena Gonzalez, union boss, now head of the California Labor Federation, and he became a Democrat. And then he reemerged, and he became a county supervisor in 2018. And then this is such a long story and a long saga, but if you're not familiar with the story and you're listening, what happened was in 2023, 5 months after he was reelected to the San Diego County Board of Supervisors, there was a late night tweet where he admitted he was struggling with the demons of alcohol and PTSD. And then just a couple days later, that's when the news reported that a lawsuit was being filed against him for allegations of sexual assault and sexual harassment. And he then resigned.
Yeah, wow. And I mean, thank goodness that was exposed, right? Obviously, all the things that he was doing that were not good for our county, not good for our city. But the fact is that he was living a lie, Obviously, right? Tried to represent himself as something that he wasn't. And, I mean, that guy was getting groomed for governor, right? I mean, he was very close with Gavin Newsom. So, I mean, his political career is done, right?
He was considered the heir apparent
Yeah.
to Gavin Newsom. And I will tell you that someone recently told me that Lorena, his wife, so this is after the scandal, apparently Lorena contacted Gavin Newsom asking if Nathan could sit on the Military Affairs Board for the state of California. And then Gavin Newsom asked his wife, and it was his wife that said no.
Interesting.
So, yes. Just kind of going back to how much Nathan Fletcher really had control over this county. He was considered the CEO of San Diego County.
Yeah.
And he was running polls during the height of COVID, measuring his own popularity based upon the different tyrannical measures that he would announce at county press conferences.
Yeah.
Very, very calculated, a political animal. He'll reemerge. There will be a Nathan Fletcher 3.0. He won't be able to run for anything, I don't think. But you'll see him as a consultant. He knows where the bodies are buried. He's got the institutional knowledge, and he's got the huge Rolodex and a powerful wife. So we'll see him somehow as a consultant.
Yeah.
Yes.
It kind of reminds me, Giorgio Carrillo?
Oh, yes, of course.
Yeah,
Rest in peace, Gio.
Rest in peace. Yeah, he was a friend of mine, and we had a one-off conversation of how he believed Nathan Fletcher was going to come back and, have this like whole new like PA, I'm a crusader for women's rights sort of thing, and kind of think about that sometimes, right? With what's going on with everything, whether he comes back, I hope not.
His court case is still ongoing, and just like you said, he is using campaign funds to fund his attorneys. And I did file a Fair Political Practices Commission complaint against him. So right now we'll see what the FPPC does with that complaint.
Interesting. I hope we get an update here soon.
Yes.
Yeah. So let's shift gears a little bit. It's September. Wow, we're already in September 2024, right? We're in election season. Donald Trump versus Kamala Harris. You're doing something pretty interesting right now that just, I believe, started today, right?
Yes.
Let's talk about that.
I cannot tell you how many times people will text me, message me on social media, email me pictures of ballot drop-off boxes. For example, someone sent me a picture of one in the middle of a field a month ago, and did some research with the registrar of voters, and it turns out they forgot about that drop-off box. It wasn't on the list. Other drop-off boxes are in public parks, far from public view, next to restrooms and trash cans. So there's a lot of cynicism out there, and I think it's justifiable with mail-in ballots and these drop-off boxes. So taking what people are most concerned about at heart, today I launched Election Protection Alliance. Using my PI skills as a licensed PI, we're going to install cameras in public places so that we can monitor these ballot drop-off boxes. But we're also going to have teams of volunteers that will be trained, and they'll be at least 100 feet away just to document any illegal or irregular activity. And I will tell you that since this morning, since announcing the EPA, which is we're the EPA for the good guys, we've already had over 40 volunteers sign up in the past few hours, and people are in. They're excited about this.
Wow. There's a lot of excitement there. As we know, right, in 2020, there were a lot of shenanigans in the election, to say the least. So we need safe, fair, and secure elections. That's for sure.
You're not allowed to talk about that.
Yeah.
Seriously, if you talk about election interference or election integrity on Facebook to this day, the algorithm will tag you. You'll get shown to very few of your followers. And I know from running for office, one of the very first things San Diego Union Tribune asked me, do you believe that Joe Biden is president? Do you believe in election? Are you an insurrectionist? just our media right now is completely controlled by the left. And that's why I think you've had such success online, Morgan, and so have I, talking about the issues that impact people, because the leftist media is completely ignoring what people actually care about.
Yeah, I mean, it is monolithically, right, left, but the fact is that, the media just in general, right, and I kind of have some criticisms of Fox News, like the left-right just paradigm, right, kind of
Yes, I
falls in
agree.
line with kind of like the uniparty system of, we got to toe the line on certain issues. And I think what people just, again, it's not Democrat, Republican. It's just as Americans, we want the truth. We want authenticity. And so the media, right, really doesn't lend itself to having these sort of conversations and really understand things, right? Because it's just, I read this, I know it's long-winded here, but, CNN, Fox News, they got producers from ESPN to make it more like, it's like a sports, like Bernie Sanders versus Ted Cruz, where let's have it be these conversations, right? Like, let's bring on Republicans, let's bring on Democrats, and let's hash out these conversations. The people want the truth, right? And I think that's what's great about platforms or podcasts, right? It's long form communication.
I totally agree. I think the people in the middle are the majority. And it's this left versus right. And I get it. And yet, when I ran for office, I was called every name in the book. So I refused to name call when I ran for office.
Yep.
I was called a right-wing extremist. I was called MAGA. I had never even publicly endorsed any presidential candidate ever publicly. I was called anti-vaxxer, anti-masker. The vitriol, it's bad. And then there's local media outlets who play into that as well, which is they'll try to take the high moral ground, but they play into it as well. But it's what I would have to say about the left versus right is there is a power out there that is intentionally trying to divide us.
Yeah. You say like Soros, like the Rothschilds, like.
Okay, let's get spiritual
Okay.
for a second. I absolutely believe there's God's plan, and then there's Satan's plan, right? And Satan would love just to turn us against each other. And being a Christ follower, there is another way. And so what I think I'm really called to do right now is to speak the truth. And sometimes the truth is going to be hard to hear, but to do it in a way that is not divisive.
Yes.
This morning, even before 8 o'clock, I received an email, hate mail, after launching my Election Protection Alliance. And the person called me a Nazi. This is all before 8 o'clock in the morning. And part of my story is I was raised Jewish, right here in San Diego. Had a bat mitzvah, went to Hebrew school, became a Christian in my 30s. And that's where we're at. The bad guys are the Nazis. And we have to change that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that we have, a lot more in common than we realize, right? And again, I tag it back to the media of just like trying to divide us and just make us hate one another. It's like, and you've done a great job of this, right? Uniting people under a shared cause that are different and diverse, come from different political backgrounds of like, hey, we're in this together, right? We want accountability. We want good policy. We want safety. We want our government to take, to not be corrupt. And I think we can all agree on that.
Yes. I am, however, earlier in our conversation, I did reference the left as being authoritarian and tyrannical. And that may seem like name calling, but I stand by that. And here's why. During 2020, 2021, there was a time when they were going to force the vaccine mandate.
Yes.
Not only on my husband, who is a defense contractor, but it wasn't an issue for me and the company I worked for, but also for my son. they were trying to pass legislation at the state level that would have mandated the COVID shot for all kids, public or private schools. So there was a time in late 2021 when I'm like, will we have to leave our home? And I will just say that being a lifelong San Diegan and being at a time in my life where I'm like, oh my gosh, if I don't take what we now know as a failed pharmaceutical product against my will, I won't be able to go to the grocery store. I won't be able to go to a restaurant. Vaccine passports, they were in Los Angeles, San Francisco, Philadelphia, Boston, New York, but we stopped them from coming here. So I stand by that. And I think there is a time and a place for when we have to call out behavior, but we can do it without name calling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Right. Explaining your position, right. Defending that. And I do think it's important, right. Like, your activism, because if they were able to get away with it, right, scot-free and just a free pass on goal, right, then what's going to be the next thing that they push, right? People like you, people like yourself organizing and making your voices heard, right? Because, what else are they going to do, right? If they can just do it and not have any blowback or retribution.
And now look at what we're facing right now, runaway inflation as a result of putting trillions of dollars into the economy for COVID money. I mean, now we all pay, 20-25% more in food. These were all the kind of things that I was talking about. Like, this is going to hurt the economy. And the kind of pushback I got, who cares about the economy? We have to save lives. Well, you know what? I never got COVID. I'm a novid.
Uh-huh.
Nobody in my family ever got it. I mean, we lived normally. We took care of ourselves. We never, not that people that did get COVID didn't take care of themselves. Let me just say that.
Yeah.
But I will just say that for the majority of Americans, COVID was not going to kill us. And so instead, what the people in power did during COVID was they killed the economy and they set back kids for a generation by closing schools. So yeah, that's why I stood up.
Absolutely. On the topic of schools and kids, right? I mean, obviously these vaccine mandates were just, I agree, totalitarian and forcing us to make a tough decision. And, some people had to get the shot or else they were going to lose their jobs and they didn't want to. I mean, it was just, really bad time, right, in our history that we'll look back and I think just really just see, wow, we should have never locked down, right? We pushed these vaccines, right? We force people to make decisions about their body that was, we were basically like, squeezing them out. You're going to lose your job. You're going to, calling you like an anti-vax, all this stuff, awful, right? But the things that's going on right now, right, with the kids and the schools, and you see all these radical bills, right?
Yes.
AB 155. I mean, I lose track of them, right? From it's now legal for a 14-year-old to have sex with a 24-year-old, right? That's legal now. This, the kids can now receive puberty blockers without their parents being notified. Like, what is going on? Because even if you're a liberal, and I've talked to so many liberals that, like, yeah, I'm not for this. I don't want to put my child in school because of this. I mean, after the age of 18, you're a legal consenting adult, right? But the fact is that it's the kids now. Like, just what is going on? I mean, anybody can just look at this and be like, this is just immoral. It's immoral. Like what's going on, Amy?
I think it's evil.
Yeah.
So we've literally gone from Democrats used to be, and I'm going to call out Democrats on this because this is their party and there's people in their party doing this. They went from, let us live our lives, live and let live, to now we're going to tell you how to live. So I'll just share my story. I have a 25-year-old who graduated from San Diego State, and I also have a 13-year-old. And when my 13-year-old was finishing up first grade, I saw the writing on the wall. And I knew that the curriculum that is so controversial right now was coming. Yeah. So I had a sit-down meeting with the superintendent of La Mesa Spring Valley Schools. And I said, I'm hearing this crazy talk. Remember, this is 7 years ago. And I asked the superintendent, they're going to have books teaching girls to be boys and boys to be girls as early as kindergarten. I expected the superintendent to look me in the eye and go, that's a right-wing conspiracy theory. Instead, she looked me right in the eyes and she said, that curriculum is coming. And so we did our public school exit. Yeah. And my son has been at a private Christian school ever since. And that's the other axe I have to grind, right? Because we're not rich. And it took real sacrifice. No vacations for my family. We drove around a car with 150,000 miles and no air conditioning in the East County so that we could afford to put our son in a private school where we wouldn't have an ideology that I do not agree with trying to persuade my son. And that ideology is everything that we known over centuries and a millennial about what's age appropriate for children is now being thrown out the window. Tara Lawson Reamer, she's running for San Diego County Board of Supervisors, District 3, and she talks about, we can't ban books, we can't ban books. She's not concerned about book banning. She just wants to be able to have age-inappropriate books available to children without their parental consent to check out and read.
Why do they want this? Why do they want this?
I loved when you had Richard Bailey on.
Yeah.
And he was talking about what are the core responsibilities of a government? Potholes, roads, public safety, right? And bureaucracy has just grown, and we're marching more and more towards control and socialism. Really, teaching kindergartners about transgenderism, that should not be a government priority. And yet, here we are. So the reasons why behind it, I believe that it's a war on Christianity. I said it. I mean, it's really clear in the Bible. God made man and woman. And if you can make people question the very definition of man and woman, well, not only will you have people question the Bible, you'll have them questioning everything or believing anything. So I believe that it is really an opportunity to take over culture and government and more control of our lives.
Yeah, Stalin said, give me a kid for 4 years, I got him for life.
Yeah.
Right? And, I mean, we could spend a whole day, I think, on root cause, and I think there is just an ideology behind it of just having our whole system just go more totalitarian, right? You have things like the World Economic Forum, right? The things that come out of there are just like a one world, like total control, consolidation at the top. And it's interesting because I think through the flows of history, you've seen societies get more totalitarian until there's like a revolution, right? You just see like what happened with the French Revolution, right? I mean, our genesis, right? I mean, our control under England, and us, fighting for a revolution. But, the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, right? Our founding fathers were Christians, right? So their guiding philosophy and belief was reading, it was the Roman government, right? Reading Plato, right? Understanding the structures of the first democracy and republic, and then also their Christian beliefs, right? And as we've just strayed more and more from that, it just seems like there's just been more and more chaos, right? I mean, we've just gotten away from like God's order of things, and as a result, like man is just like running crazy with all these like ideas.
I love politics, right? But politics is not going to change the world. Jesus is.
Amen.
Yeah. And so ultimately, when I'm so frustrated and I sometimes feel powerless in this political environment, I just remember that God is in control.
Yes.
And really the answer is if more people followed him, not the Republican Party, not the Democratic Party, not the latest flash in the pan political figure, but if they followed Jesus, our world would be so much better. And by the way, not followed religion, not followed Christianity, followed Jesus.
Amen. Amen. Talk more about your faith, right? How that guides you and leads you in the political arena.
Oh my gosh. Well, I was raised Jewish, had a bat mitzvah, went to Hebrew school, the whole 9 yards. And then when I was 30 years old, my dad, who had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis since I was little and had been in a wheelchair, died of complications from MS. And I was 8 months pregnant with my first child. And 5 weeks later, after a normal, uncomplicated pregnancy, my daughter Ashley was born in a coma, and she died in my arms. And so my faith journey is very much informs how I operate now. Because I went from a place of total pain and bottomless sadness to hope. And I think that's what the answer is. And there's a lot of story in between of how I was able to get the transformation that I needed to be the leader that I am now. But that's something that I will always remember is to have hope, even when things seem hopeless in this political climate.
Got to have hope. Got to keep the faith, right? That's what's, the biggest thing that God's given in my life is just, even in the darkest of times, right, the trials and tribulations, and knowing that it's all going to be good. It's all going to be okay, right? Because God's in control.
Mm-hmm. I'm still going to fight like heck.
Heck, yeah.
Definitely.
Absolutely. We want to talk a little bit more about the election, right? Where do you see the race right now? I mean, we had what happened in July, right, with Biden being forced out and then Kamala coming in. And, when I had Richard Bailey in, we were talking about, the surge with Kamala. It's, just about 2 months exactly, right, when we're having the election in November. I mean, what do you, where are things stand right now? What's going to go on over the next 2 months?
Wow, I think we're living in the most incredible times to live in right now. Think about it. Just in the past few months, we witnessed an assassination attempt against a former president, and we all witnessed the political coup of Biden being removed and Kamala Harris being installed without one vote from the voters. And so as we go into the next, 65 days? If you're listening right now, we'll be a little bit further along, but anything could happen. I think that there are forces out there that don't want Donald Trump to win and will do anything that they can to make sure that he doesn't, using lawfare, using the justice system against a political opponent. So honestly, if I were in Las Vegas right now and I had to bet on who's going to win the presidential race, I wouldn't even know who to vote for. I think anything could happen and everything can happen in the next 2 months.
Yeah. So you think it's going to be, the really important aspects, right, with the election integrity? I think that's probably going to be the most important thing, right? The legal and then just how we conduct this election, right?
I think it's all going to boil down, as you know, because you're very well versed in American history and American politics, the swing states. That's why the candidates are spending so much time there. So as Wisconsin or Pennsylvania votes, apparently they're the ones that are going to decide this election. Because as you know, we're in deep blue California, where even though the most Republicans live in the state of California, we have more Republicans in the state of California than Texas even. But let's face it, when it comes to the presidential race, California is blue, and those votes are going to go towards Harris.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So in 2020, interesting stat, the most votes that a state cast for Donald Trump was California, right? Just by sheer size, 54 electoral votes now, right? So, but, that's obviously going to go to Harris just by way. But, it's going to be definitely going to be a close election, right? Just like the last two. And, it'll be we'll watching suspense.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Amy, is there anything else, you want to talk about, that get your message out to the audience?
I would just ask anyone who's interested in more about Restore San Diego, go to restoresandiego.org. You can sign up for our newsletter. You can volunteer for the Election Protection Alliance. Also, my social media is Amy FOR San Diego on Facebook, X, and TikTok.
Thank you, Amy, for coming on the show.
Thank you.
All right. How'd that go, Leo?